Before we begin the story, don't forget to like the video and tell us where you watched it in the comments. Elias Ward rode along the narrow dirt path that cut through the valley, his horse moving at an easy pace. The late afternoon sun sat low behind the ridge, casting long, sharp shadows across the ground. He had taken this route countless times in the past 10 years, mostly because it led to the old well near the edge of the valley, one of the few reliable water sources on this side of the frontier. He knew the land well. He also knew who lived in the small cabin tucked between the cottonwoods. An Apache widow named Aiona, a woman who rarely spoke to anyone and kept her distance from neighboring settlements. Elias was not a man who sought out company either. He had buried both parents before he turned 20. His younger brother died in a small border raid 4 winters ago. After that, he stopped looking for long conversations or friendships. He lived alone in a small ranch house several miles away and survived by hunting, repairing tools, and doing quiet work for ranchers in need. He had no mission other than to stay alive and avoid trouble. But today he had a clear reason for passing the cabin. The well needed checking. Recent windstorms had knocked debris across the valley, and Elias wanted to make sure the water wasn't contaminated. That was his excuse. It was easier than admitting the truth, that he had begun paying attention to the widow's cabin more than usual these past weeks. As he approached the clearing, something caught his eye. Aiona was lying on the ground, flat on her back, just a few steps from her porch. Elias pulled his horse to a stop so quickly the animal shifted under him. He scanned the area. No sign of an attack, no blood, no overturned buckets. The air was still, the cabin door open by only a crack. Aiona's arms rested stiffly at her sides. Her eyes were halfway open, but unfocused. A cold tightness shot through Elias's chest. Is she hurt? Snakebite? Fever? He climbed down without thinking and walked toward her, boots pressing into the dry soil. Aiona did not move. Only when his shadow fell across her face did her chest rise sharply, as if she had been holding her breath. Elias crouched down. Aiona, can you hear me? Her eyes snapped into focus. She inhaled sharply and turned her face away in a quick, defensive motion. Her fingers curled against the ground, nails digging into the dirt as if she needed something solid to anchor herself. I'm fine, she said, her voice hoarse, almost irritated. She tried to sit up, but her hands trembled. Elias reached out instinctively, then stopped, unsure whether she would accept help or lash out. She noticed the hesitation. Her jaw tightened. I said, I'm fine. Elias stood, but didn't back away. You were lying still. I thought you were hurt. Aiona steadied herself using her porch post and got to her feet. She kept her eyes low, not because of shame, but because she didn't want to give him space to study her. There was fear in the tension of her shoulders, not directed at him specifically, more like fear caught in her body from something older and much larger than this moment. Elias recognized the look. He had felt it himself in the days after his brother died. The sudden freezing of the body when a memory hits too fast. Aiona brushed dust from her dress, taking longer than necessary. What are you doing here, Elias Ward? Her tone wasn't hostile, only guarded. I came to check the well, he answered. Storm last night might have clogged it. I figured you rely on it as much as I do. She lifted her chin, still refusing to look directly at him. I can take care of myself. He nodded once. I know. For a moment, neither spoke. Aiona finally glanced at him, her expression tight, eyes still slightly wide from whatever flashback had hit her. She seemed to expect judgment, pity, maybe, or some assumption about her weakness. Instead, Elias simply asked, Do you need anything before I go? She let out a slow breath, the kind someone releases after a long internal argument. No, she said. Just go. He looked at her a bit longer, making sure she was steady on her feet. She didn't like the attention, but she didn't step back either. Elias turned toward his horse. As he mounted, he felt the familiar tug of conflict. Leave her alone, or stay close just in case she collapsed again. He chose the safer path for both of them. He didn't linger, didn't question her further, but he rode slower than usual, listening for any sound from behind him. Aiona watched him leave. Once he was far enough away, She sat down on the porch steps, arms wrapped tightly around herself. Her breathing was shallow. The memory that had overtaken her still clung to her ribs. The last person who saw her like this had been her husband, years before he was killed. She whispered to herself in Apache, almost angrily, "I should not have let him see me." But she also knew that, in those few seconds before she regained control, Elias had not mocked her, demanded explanations, or invaded her space. He had simply checked whether she was alive. That thought sat in her chest longer than she wanted it to. Elias returned to his ranch before sundown, but the image of Aiona lying on the ground stayed in his mind long after he lit his lamp and fed his horse. He tried to push it aside, told himself she was strong, independent, capable. She had survived harder years than he had. But the tension in her breath, the stiffness in her hands, the way her voice trembled even when she tried to sound firm, those details stuck to him like burrs on his coat. He slept poorly. Every time he drifted off, he saw her eyes open but unfocused, as if something far behind him had pulled her away. By morning, he had made up his mind. He needed to check on her, not because she was weak, but because something had shaken her deeply enough to leave her on the ground in broad daylight. And because he realized he didn't actually know whether she had anyone else who looked after her. The valley had its own quiet rules. People survived by paying attention. People stayed alive by noticing things before they got worse. Elias saddled his horse, took a water jug, and rode out again. Aiona was already outside when he arrived. She stood near the fence with a small basket of dried herbs in her hands. When she saw him ride up, her shoulders stiffened slightly, but she didn't retreat inside. That alone told Elias she wasn't as unsettled as she had been yesterday. He dismounted carefully, aware that any sudden gesture might make her feel cornered. "I came to check the fence," he said. Storm pushed a lot of branches around. Could be weak spots. Aiona looked him over for a long moment, trying to decide whether he was lying. She wasn't stupid. She knew he had no obligation to patrol her land. "At this hour?" she asked. "It's when the ground's still cool," Elias answered. "Easier to work." Aiona held his gaze, assessing him. She didn't trust people who offered help without reason. Her life had taught her that favors usually carried a hidden cost. But Elias had left her alone the moment she asked him to yesterday. He hadn't touched her when she froze. He hadn't asked what happened. Those things mattered. "Fine," she said. "You do what you want." She walked past him to her porch, pretending to rearrange tools, though she kept watching him from the corner of her eye. Elias began clearing broken branches along the fence. The morning was quiet except for the dry scrape of wood and the distant sound of birds. After a few minutes, he noticed something unusual. The earth near the fence had two sets of footprints, hers and someone else's, older but still recent. He straightened up and wiped his hands on his trousers. "You expecting someone around here?" he asked calmly. Aiona froze, her back still turned to him. She didn't answer immediately. Her palms rested on the rail of the porch, tense and still. "Tracks by the fence," he added. "Not yours." She walked toward him slowly, her expression unreadable. She crouched beside the prints and examined them with practiced precision. Her face tightened. "3 days ago," she said quietly. "Could be hunters passing through." Elias watched her eyes. Hunters didn't make her voice sound that small. He remembered the sudden panic she'd had yesterday, the way she had lain flat, like she was bracing for something real, not imagined. "You're not sure," Elias said. Aiona stood up straight. For a moment, she looked like she wanted to deny it. Her pride pushed against the truth. Then she exhaled slowly. "There was a man from another band," she admitted. "He came last winter, asking questions about my husband, about the raid that killed him. He thought I knew more than I said." She looked toward the trees. "I sent him away." "Did he threaten you?" Elias asked. She didn't answer, which was an answer in itself. Elias felt the familiar tightening in his chest, the same protective instinct he had felt when he found her on the ground. He didn't push further. She wasn't ready for details. But knowing someone might be circling her land gave new meaning to her fear. He picked his tools back up and worked in silence, though this time it wasn't uncomfortable. Aiona remained close, occasionally handing him a piece of rope or holding part of the fence steady. Their movements fell into a natural rhythm. As the sun climbed higher, she finally spoke again. "You asked yesterday if I needed anything." Her voice was steady, not defensive. Elias looked at her. "I remember. I don't need much," she said. "But if you see strangers near this end of the valley, tell me." He nodded. "I will." Aiona seemed relieved, but didn't show it openly. She went to fetch a small pot from her porch and returned with dried herbs and hot water from her stove. "I made tea," she said, leaving the cup on a clean wooden crate between them. "For the work." Elias understood what she was really offering. Not tea, not comfort, permission to stay a little longer. He accepted. For the first time, she sat across from him without keeping her distance. Her eyes, though still wary, were clearer than they were yesterday. Elias didn't ask about the panic that had overtaken her. Aiona didn't ask why he came back so soon. But the silence between them no longer felt like a wall. It felt like two people trying to understand whether they could rely on one another. By the time Elias prepared to leave, Aiona had placed something new on her porch, a folded blanket, neatly arranged in a spot he could see. He didn't comment. She didn't explain, but both knew what it meant. She hadn't asked him to stay, yet she hadn't asked him to go either. The next morning arrived colder than expected, with a thin layer of frost clinging to the grass near Ahiona's cabin. Elias noticed it as he rode up, his breath visible in the air. He hadn't planned on returning so soon, yet something about the footprints near her fence stayed in his mind through the night. He had told himself he was simply checking the valley for storm damage, but he knew that wasn't the whole truth. He wanted to see if the fear in Ahiona's eyes had changed, if she had slept, if she felt safer, if she needed anything she wouldn't admit. Aiona was not outside this time. Smoke rose from a small hole in her roof, showing that she was keeping a fire lit. Elias approached the porch slowly, not wanting to startle her. The blanket she'd left yesterday was still there, folded neatly in the same spot. It looked deliberate, not forgotten. Waiting, he tapped lightly on the cabin door. No response. He hesitated, debating whether to call her name or ride away. Before he could decide, the door cracked open and Aiona looked out. Her hair was braided, her face tired but not shaken like before. She seemed surprised to see him, but not annoyed. "You're early," she said. "Frost came in. Thought I'd check the creek and fence before the ground softens." Ahiona's eyes lowered, as if examining his real motive. Then she opened the door wider. "You can come in. It's cold." He stepped inside carefully. The cabin was simple. Wooden walls, a small stove, a low table. A deer hide hung neatly above her sleeping area. Everything was organized, but there was a sense of strain in the room, as if she had cleaned it quickly out of habit, not comfort. She placed a pot of warm water near him. "For your hands." Elias nodded and washed without speaking, grateful more than he expected. His fingers were stiff from riding in the cold. Aiona returned to the stove, stirring a pot. "You worked hard yesterday. I made stew. You should eat before you freeze out there." This was more openness than she had shown in months of living near each other. But Elias noticed something deeper. She kept glancing toward the small window, facing the forest. She listened for sounds outside. She was watching for footsteps again. "You think that man could return?" Elias asked quietly, without pushing. Aiona stopped stirring. Her shoulders tightened. "He might. Men like him don't give up when they want answers." "What answers?" She turned slightly, showing the edge of the memory she hadn't shared yet. "The raid that killed my husband, people think it ended cleanly. But it didn't. Some survived. Some ran. One of them believes my husband hid something. A name, a location. I don't know. He thinks I know it." "Do you?" Elias asked. Ahiona's face hardened with a mix of pain and anger. "I know nothing. If I did, I wouldn't tell him." Elias studied her expression and understood something unspoken. That winter visit wasn't the first time she'd been threatened, and it wouldn't be the last if the man believed she held answers. Her panic on the ground suddenly made more sense. Not weakness, but the body remembering danger that hadn't passed yet. "Should I look around the creek after I check the fence?" Elias asked. "See if anyone's been nearby." Aiona didn't reject the offer. She just nodded once, quietly grateful. Before he stepped outside, she handed him a small bundle of dried herbs. Keep this with you. It keeps animals away. And I didn't want you to ride out with nothing warm. Elias accepted the herbs without comment, but the gesture settled in his chest with unexpected weight. She wasn't just tolerating his presence anymore. She was allowing space for it. He left the cabin and walked along the fence line. The ground was too hard to show fresh tracks, but he kept scanning the edges of the trees. The cold air sharpened his senses. Every rustle of dry leaves, every shifting shadow, every sudden bird call made him pivot a second time. Halfway down the fence, he found the tool she always used for repairs, a small wooden mallet, lying in the dirt near a broken slat. It looked like she had dropped it days ago and never came back to pick it up. That alone told him she had been too shaken to finish fixing the fence after the stranger last passed through. He repaired the slat, cleaned the area, and returned to the porch where Aiona waited. She stood holding a second blanket now, clean, warm, and folded with the same careful precision. If you're working here in cold mornings, she said, you shouldn't freeze. Elias reached for it, but she pulled it back slightly. Her eyes searched his face with a question she didn't voice aloud. Will you be coming every morning? She asked. The question was direct, vulnerable, and stripped of pride. Elias realized she wasn't asking out of convenience. She wanted someone near, someone steady, without having to say she was scared. I'll come, Elias said simply. If you want me to. Aiona nodded, the tension in her shoulders loosening just a little. I do. As Elias prepared to mount his horse, she stepped closer, no longer keeping that careful distance she had held for years. Her voice was low, steady. If the man returns, she said, I don't want to face him alone. You won't, Elias answered. The wind picked up, carrying the cold across the valley. Aiona watched him ride away, and for the first time, she didn't close the cabin door immediately. She stayed on the porch with the blanket in her arms, feeling something unfamiliar settle inside her chest, something closer to safety than fear. The silence between them had shifted again. This time, it wasn't hesitation. It was the beginning of dependence, not forced but chosen. Elias returned the next morning, carrying the blanket Aiona had given him. The air was sharper than the day before, and the sun had not yet warmed the valley. He saw smoke rising from her chimney again, steady and controlled. A sign she had woken early, kept her fire alive, and was likely watching for movement outside. After what she had revealed, he understood why. Aiona stood near the woodpile when he approached. She wasn't startled by his presence this time. She looked like she had been expecting him. Her posture was straighter, but her eyes were tired. Elias recognized the look, someone who had slept but not well. Someone who checked the window every hour to see if danger had returned. You came early again, she said, her breath visible in the cold. You asked me to, Elias replied simply. She didn't deny it. She walked to the porch and placed a new stack of kindling by the door, trying to keep her hands busy. There was tension in her movements. Elias noticed she kept her knife tucked at her waist, not a usual morning habit for her. Elias dismounted and tied his horse near the fence. He could feel her watching him as he approached, not suspiciously, but with a kind of quiet relief she didn't want him to see. She finally broke the silence. You repaired the broken slat yesterday. You left your mallet on the ground, Elias said. Figured something interrupted you. Aiona hesitated, then admitted, I heard something in the woods. Footsteps, not animal. I went inside before I could finish. Were you followed? Elias asked. I don't know, she said. It felt like someone was watching, but I didn't see anyone. This was something listeners would wonder about earlier, how long she had been sensing danger, and why she reacted so strongly on the ground in Chapter 1. This moment clarified it. Her fear wasn't sudden or random. It had been building for weeks. Elias didn't say anything for a moment. He walked the edge of the porch, scanning the tree line the same way she had. The tension in his shoulders was different now. Not fear, but readiness. Aiona moved closer. You don't believe it was hunters? No, Elias said. Hunters don't hide their tracks, and they don't circle one cabin more than once. Her expression tightened. She wasn't used to someone taking her concerns seriously. Elias took a quiet breath. I want to know about yesterday, he said. When you were on the ground. You don't have to tell me everything. Just what you want me to understand. Her face changed, not with anger, but with a deep, reluctant vulnerability. She walked to the porch steps and sat, resting her elbows on her knees. Elias joined her, but he kept some distance, letting her decide how close she wanted him. It wasn't the first time, she said. Sometimes the memory comes back fast. My body reacts before I can stop it. Elias listened without turning toward her too quickly. She appreciated the space. My husband was killed near the river, she continued. I saw it. I remember the way he fell. I remember the man who stood near him. The same man who came last winter asking questions. She swallowed hard. When I lie down like that, it's because the memory hits too fast. I need the ground under me. It helps me breathe. Elias didn't interrupt. I thought you'd judge me, she said quietly, or call me weak. I've seen strong people collapse from memories, Elias said. It doesn't make anyone weak. She looked at him sharply, studying whether he meant it. He did, and that mattered more to her than she wanted to admit. A gust of cold wind moved between them. Aiona wrapped her arms around herself, and Elias noticed she hadn't eaten yet. Another detail that would leave questions unanswered if ignored. He stood up. You haven't had breakfast, he said. I can tell. Aiona lifted an eyebrow. And how would you know that? You're shaking, he said. Not from cold. From hunger. She didn't deny it. Inside, a small pot sat near the stove, untouched. Elias prepared the fire with a few swift movements. Aiona watched him, surprised by how naturally he moved around her space without invading it. As the stew warmed, Elias asked, What was your husband like? Ahiona's eyes softened with a grief that had lost its sharp edge, but still carried weight. He was quiet, she said. He didn't speak unless he had something worth saying. He taught me to hunt, to dry meat, to tan hides. He wasn't afraid of work. She paused. He would not want me living with fear. Elias understood. He also understood why she had chosen this remote part of the valley. She was trying to build a life close to the land her husband loved, but far from the people who brought danger. When the stew was ready, Aiona placed a bowl in front of Elias without ceremony. You helped with the fence. You eat too. Elias accepted and sat across from her at the low table. The simple act of sharing a meal quieted the room in a different way than before. The silence wasn't guarded anymore. It felt like a fragile truce between two people who had lived too long alone. After eating, Elias stood. I'll check the creek now, he said. Aiona followed him to the door. Elias, if you find anything at all, come back. I will. She hesitated before saying the next sentence, something she had never said out loud to anyone since her husband's death. And don't go far. Elias looked at her, steady and certain. I wasn't planning to. Elias followed the creek south, moving slowly and watching for anything out of place. The ground was still stiff from the cold, but patches of softer dirt held clear impressions of movement. He crouched near a bend in the creek and studied the earth. Most of the prints were deer and fox, normal for this part of the valley. But farther ahead, near a cluster of cottonwoods, a deeper indentation caught his eye. A boot print. Not his. Not fresh, but more recent than he liked. He didn't call out or show alarm. Instead, he stayed still, listening. The forest gave nothing back, only the distant call of a crow and the faint rush of water over stones. He memorized the direction the tracks pointed, then turned silently and headed back toward Ahiona's cabin. She needed to hear this from him directly, not discover it alone. When he rode into the clearing, Aiona was outside chopping wood. She wasn't graceful with the axe. She swung too high, hesitated too long, corrected at the last second, but she kept moving with stubborn determination. The blade struck the log unevenly, sending wood splintering sideways. You don't usually chop in the middle of the day, Elias said as he approached. She didn't stop swinging. I needed something to do. He took the axe from her hands gently, not to control her, but to give her a break. Let me. Aiona stepped back, breathing hard. Her face was flushed from effort, but Elias could see something else in her eyes. Restlessness, the kind that comes from preparing for the worst. "What did you find in the creek?" she asked. He said another log on the block. A boot print. Could be days old, but it wasn't mine. Aiona's breath caught slightly. She didn't panic, but she stiffened, grounding herself. Heading which direction? West, Elias said. Toward the ridge. Toward here. She lowered herself onto the porch step, her expression tightening. I knew he'd come back. I felt it yesterday. This answered a question many listeners might have wondered earlier. Was her fear grounded in something real or imagined? Now, it was clear. There was a real threat, close and deliberate. Elias watched her carefully before speaking again. If he does come, you won't be alone. Aiona didn't respond immediately. She glanced toward the tree line, toward the direction of the tracks, as if expecting a figure to step out at any moment. She wasn't the kind of woman to ask for protection, even when she needed it. Elias chopped 3 more logs, steady and controlled. When he finished, he leaned the axe against the porch and sat beside her. He didn't touch her, but he stayed close enough for her to feel his presence. Aiona exhaled slowly. You keep coming back. Why? What do you mean? Elias asked. You don't owe me anything. You don't even know me. Elias looked down at his hands. I know enough. Aiona didn't look convinced. Enough to risk trouble from a man who killed before. Enough to not walk away when someone needs help, Elias said. And enough to see you're trying to survive alone when you shouldn't have to. Aiona absorbed his words with quiet intensity. It wasn't flattery. It wasn't pity. It was an honest recognition she had never allowed anyone to voice before. She finally asked the question that had lingered since Chapter 1, something listeners would naturally wonder. Why does Elias care this much? Why her? Why now? What makes you stay, she said. Elias took a slow breath, answering truthfully. Because you remind me of what happens when someone carries too much alone. I've been there. Aiona studied him, seeing something she hadn't noticed before, a controlled sadness under his steady exterior. You lost family, she said. Years ago, Elias replied. My brother. I didn't handle it well. How did you survive it, she asked. I didn't, Elias said quietly. Not really. I just kept working, kept moving. Didn't trust anyone long enough to stay put. Aiona sat with his words for a long moment. She realized they were more alike than she ever imagined. 2 people shaped by loss, holding themselves together with routine, silence, and distance from others. The cold wind picked up, carrying dust across the clearing. Aiona pulled her shawl tighter around herself, but Elias noticed her hands shaking slightly. Not from fear this time, but from exhaustion. She had barely eaten in the past 2 days. You need rest, Elias said. And food. Aiona shook her head stubbornly. There's work to do. Some of it can wait, Elias insisted. Some of it you shouldn't do alone. She didn't argue. Instead, she stood and walked slowly to the cabin door, leaving it open. You can come in, she said. Inside, the warmth of the small stove cut through the chill. Aiona filled 2 bowls with the remaining stew from the morning. Elias noticed how she pushed her own bowl toward him first, even though hers was smaller. It was a small detail, but it revealed something vital. She had spent so many years surviving that she didn't trust her own needs anymore. You eat first, Elias said. You need it more. Aiona hesitated, then sat across from him and began to eat slowly. Her shoulders relaxed for the first time that day. After a few bites, she set the bowl down. If he comes back, she said quietly, I want to be ready. I don't want to hide. Elias nodded. Then we'll make a plan. The word we changed the room. Aiona heard it. Elias meant it. He leaned forward, steady and grounded. I'll stay near your cabin until we know for sure if he's gone or watching. I'll check the trails north and west. And if he steps foot near your porch. Aiona looked up. I want him to see I'm not alone this time. Elias held her gaze. You won't be. Outside, the valley was quiet, but the tension of the unseen threat hung over the land. Inside the cabin, something different took shape, an understanding unspoken but solid. They were no longer 2 people surviving separately. They were beginning to survive together. Elias stayed near Aiona's cabin during the late afternoon, keeping to the edge of the clearing so she wouldn't feel crowded. He repaired the loose boards on her storage shed, checked the roof for leaks, and res-tacked her firewood so she didn't have to lift more than she should. He worked without being asked, and Aiona watched him from the porch with a mixture of caution and something quieter, something like relief she didn't want to show openly. There were still unanswered questions that listeners would naturally wonder about. Was Elias staying because he felt responsible or because he wanted to be there? What did Aiona really feel about his presence? And what would happen if the man from her past returned? Chapter 6 needed to address these, and so the story continued without pause. As the sun lowered behind the ridge, Elias finished tightening the last hinge on her shed door. Aiona stepped off the porch and approached him. She carried 2 small blankets under her arm, both cleaned and folded neatly. "You didn't have to fix all that," she said. "You needed it done," Elias replied. "Storm season's coming. Better to prepare now." Aiona didn't argue. Instead, she handed him one of the blankets. "For tonight." Elias looked at her, understanding the implication. "I'll stay nearby." Aiona nodded, though the line of tension in her jaw softened. "Not too far." Her voice carried something different this time, trust mixed with hesitation. Elias felt the shift. It wasn't romantic, not yet. It was the kind of vulnerability that came after years of silence, the kind that cost more than words. Inside the cabin, they shared a simple meal. Elias sat at the low table while Aiona stirred the last bit of stew over the fire. She wasn't talkative, but neither was he. Their silences fit together in a way that felt steady, almost natural. After a few minutes, Aiona said quietly, "You didn't tell me why you keep coming back." Elias stirred the stew in his bowl, choosing his words carefully. "Because I don't want anything happening to you." "You barely know me," she said. "That doesn't matter." "It should," she insisted. But she didn't sound angry, just unsure. Elias set the bowl down. "You're alone out here. I know what that does to a person. Fear grows faster when there's no one to see it." Aiona looked down at her hands. "I didn't think anyone cared what happened to me." "I do," Elias said. The room grew still as she tried to absorb his words. She didn't cry. Aiona was not someone who cried easily, but her breath slowed and her shoulders relaxed by a fraction. When the wind outside rose, she flinched slightly. Elias saw it. He stood and checked the window, scanning the tree line. Nothing moved. "You think he's close," Elias said. Aiona tightened her shawl. "I don't know. I just feel it, like he's waiting for the right moment." Elias nodded. "Then we'll keep watch." Aiona lifted her eyes. "We?" "Yes," Elias said. "We." This single word settled something between them that had been uncertain since Chapter 1. It clarified their connection for listeners. They were no longer 2 people cautiously circling each other. They were forming a partnership, quiet but real. After dinner, Elias prepared to sleep outside beside the porch. He spread the blanket she had given him over the ground, choosing a spot where he could see the tree lean and hear if anyone approached. Aiona stepped outside with her own blanket around her shoulders. "You don't have to sleep on the ground," she said. "I'm used to it." She looked at him for a long moment, then sat on the porch steps near him. "When my husband was alive," she said slowly, "he always slept closest to the door. He said danger always comes when people are unprepared." Elias nodded, understanding both the meaning and the memory. "I'll keep watch." Aiona let out a breath she had been holding for hours. She wasn't used to someone offering protection without expecting something in return. It unsettled her, but it also calmed her in a way she hadn't felt in years. Moonlight dimly lit the clearing. Elias rested with his back against the porch post, listening to the night. Aiona remained on the steps, arms wrapped around herself. She looked toward the dark line of the forest, then toward Elias. "Do you think he'll come tonight?" she asked. "If he does," Elias said, "he'll see I'm here. That might be enough to keep him away. And if it isn't enough?" Elias adjusted the blanket across his lap. "Then he'll learn that I'm not easy to move." Aiona didn't smile, but her eyes softened with a quiet certainty. She stood slowly and placed her hand on the porch railing. "Good night, Elias." "Night, Aiona." She went inside, but she didn't shut the door fully. She left it open by an inch, just enough for him to hear if she needed him, and enough for her to know he was still outside. As the night deepened, Elias stayed awake, listening to every shift of wind and branch. He wasn't guarding only her cabin. He was guarding the fragile sense of safety she had begun to allow herself. For the first time in years, Aiona fell asleep with someone close enough to hear her breathing. And for the first time in years, Elias felt he was exactly where he needed to be. Elias woke before the sun rose, the cold biting through the blanket Aiona had given him. He had slept only in short intervals, his instincts waking him at every sound. The crack of a branch, the shift of wind, the distant movement of deer in the brush. Nothing unusual had happened during the night, but the unease hadn't left him. It settled low in his stomach, the way it did during his scouting days when something unseen was nearby. When he glanced toward the cabin, he noticed the door was still open by the same inch Aiona had left. A thin strip of warm firelight cut through the gap. She was awake too. Elias stood, stretched the stiffness out of his shoulders, and knocked lightly before stepping in. Aiona sat beside the stove, her blanket pulled around her, a pot heating quietly beside her. She wasn't startled by his entrance. She merely lifted her eyes to him with a tired awareness. "You didn't sleep," she said. "Not much," Elias replied. "You didn't either." Aiona shook her head. There was no point pretending. "I heard something around midnight," she said. "A branch snapping. Not close, but not far." Elias had heard it too. Could have been an animal. Aiona stared into the fire for a moment. Or it could have been him. This lingering question, is there truly someone watching, had been building across the previous chapters, and Chapter 7 needed to address it without breaking the slow, grounded tone. Elias sat across from her, lowering himself onto the floor by the small table. "Footprints don't lie," he said. "The ones near the creek were real. But whether he's close today or miles away, we'll deal with it." Aiona studied him. Her fear wasn't frantic anymore. It was controlled, shaped by a decision she was slowly making. She finally asked the question listeners had been waiting for. "Why didn't you leave after last night?" Most men would have. Elias considered the words before answering. "Because if I left, you'd be alone with danger you shouldn't face alone." "And what about your own safety?" she asked. "You're not the only one with ghosts," Elias said. "I've spent years running from mine. I'm tired of running." Aiona was silent, taking in the weight of his honesty. She wasn't used to anyone trusting her enough to share something personal. She wasn't used to trusting anyone either. Her husband had been the last person she had allowed close, and when he died, she had shut the rest of the world out. Finally, she whispered, "I don't want you hurt because of me." Elias shook his head. "I'm here because I chose to be, not because you owe me anything." The stove crackled softly between them, warming the small cabin. Aiona stood and handed him a bowl of warm broth. She didn't speak, but the act was deliberate. She was caring for him the same way he was watching over her. After breakfast, they walked the perimeter of her land together. Aiona stayed close to Elias, scanning the woods with sharp eyes. Every few steps, she paused, listening. Elias noticed how carefully she moved, how she positioned herself so she could see both him and the tree line. She wasn't scared of fighting. She was scared of being caught off guard again. "Your husband," Elias said quietly as they walked. "You never told me how he died." Aiona slowed, but didn't stop. "He was ambushed near the river. The man who came last winter was part of the same group. They wanted information about a trade route. My husband knew. He wouldn't give it. And they think you know it," Elias finished. Aiona nodded. "But I don't. If I did, maybe I'd have used it to keep myself safe." This answered a lingering gap. Why is she being hunted at all? Now the reason was clear, grounded, and believable. They reached the edge of the forest. Elias knelt beside a patch of soft earth, brushing away frost. No new tracks, no movement. But Ahiona's breathing changed, quicker, shallow. Elias looked up to see her face tightened, her fingers frozen midair. The old panic was crawling back too fast. "It's all right," Elias said gently, rising to his feet. "You're here. You're safe." But Ahiona's body began to seize with a familiar terror, the same paralysis she had experienced the first day he found her. She pressed her hands against her knees, trying to steady herself. "I don't want this," she said, voice strained. "I hate that it still happens." Elias stepped closer, but didn't touch her. He wanted her to see he was there without crowding her. "Look at me," he said softly. Aiona lifted her eyes, unfocused at first, then slowly sharpening on him. Her breathing steadied. Elias kept his voice low and firm. "You're not on the riverbank," he said. "You're not alone. It's me. I'm right here." Bit by bit, her body loosened. She straightened, rubbing her hands together as warmth returned to her fingers. "I'm sorry," she murmured. "Don't be," Elias replied. "You fought it. That's what matters." Aiona took a long breath. She looked around as if seeing the clearing clearly for the first time. "It's easier when you're here," she admitted. "The fear hits, but it doesn't stay." Elias nodded, deeply aware of the weight of her words. They walked back to the cabin together, side by side. Aiona didn't keep her distance like before. She didn't hide her shaking hands or her vulnerability. And Elias didn't pretend he wasn't affected by watching her struggle. Inside the cabin, she sat on the edge of the porch step. Elias remained near her, close enough to offer steady presence. After a long silence, she spoke again. "Elias, I don't know what you want from me," she said quietly. "But if you're here to stay, I need to understand why." Elias met her eyes without hesitation. "I'm not here for anything from you," he said. "I'm here because I want to be part of your life. Not to take anything, just to stay if you'll let me." Ahiona's expression shifted, fear, confusion, and something much softer all moving across her face. She didn't answer right away, but she didn't reject him either. She finally whispered, then stay today. "Don't go far." "I won't," Elias said. As the afternoon settled and the wind eased, Aiona leaned her shoulder lightly against the wooden post beside her. She didn't ask Elias to sit next to her, but she didn't need to. He sat close enough for her to feel his presence, firm and grounding. For the first time since her husband's death, Aiona let someone stay beside her as the fear faded. And for the first time since losing his brother, Elias felt something like purpose returning, quiet, steady, and entirely real. Elias spent the rest of that day near Ahiona's cabin, repairing small things she had ignored for months. Loose shutters, a cracked window frame, a sagging corner of the porch. He did it quietly, never asking for permission, but never touching anything personal inside the home. The work grounded him. It kept him alert and gave Aiona enough time to settle her breathing after the panic attack by the forest. Aiona watched him through the open cabin door as she cleaned dried herbs, her movement steady but slower than usual. She wasn't hiding her exhaustion anymore. She also wasn't pretending she didn't want him there. The door stayed open the entire morning. Not a mistake, not a habit, but a choice. Listeners might still wonder, what exactly does Aiona feel for Elias now? Is she only relying on him for safety, or is something deeper forming? And what does Elias want from her, truly? Chapter 8 needed to clarify these questions without rushing the emotional realism. By midday, Elias returned to the cabin with a bundle of freshly chopped firewood, stacking it neatly beside the stove. Aiona looked up as he set the last pieces down. "You work too much," she said. Elias shrugged. "Helps keep the cold out." Aiona raised an eyebrow. "Who's cold? Mine or yours?" "Both," Elias replied. She didn't smile, but her eyes warmed in a way that didn't need a smile. Later in the afternoon, they sat together at the low table eating a simple meal of dried meat, beans, and warm bread. Aiona ate slowly, tasting each bite like she hadn't eaten properly in days. Elias noticed her improving appetite but didn't comment. Instead, he asked, "How long were you alone before I found you that first day?" She took a breath and set her cup down. 3 weeks, she said, since the last time anyone passed through. I didn't want people around. I thought I could manage. And could you? Elias asked, not challenging, just honest. Aiona looked at her hands, the truth clear in her silence. Not the way I thought, she said softly. I kept telling myself I was strong enough. But fear wears you down even when nothing happens. Elias nodded. He understood that more deeply than she knew. Aiona continued quietly. I didn't want someone to pity me. I didn't want to look weak. Especially not to you. Elias's expression softened. I never saw you as weak. She studied him, measuring the weight of the words. After a long silence, she said, I know that now. This addressed the lingering tension from earlier chapters. Why Aiona resisted help. Why she avoided eye contact. Why she'd been defensive even when afraid. It wasn't about distrust of Elias. It was about shame and pride shaped by grief. As the day turned colder, Elias stepped outside to check the perimeter again. Aiona followed him onto the porch, wrapping her shawl around her shoulders. She stood close enough that their arms nearly touched. You'll stay here tonight too? She asked, not looking at him. If you want me to, Elias said. Aiona hesitated, a long, vulnerable hesitation, before answering. I sleep better when you're here. Elias didn't need more than that. I'll stay. This settled another unspoken question for listeners. Is Elias staying out of duty or genuine connection? It was clear now. He chose to be near her because he cared, not because he was trapped in responsibility. As evening settled, Aiona lit a small lantern and placed it on the porch. It glowed warmly against the growing darkness. When my husband was alive, she said quietly, he always left a light out for me if I came home after dark. A sign I wasn't alone. Elias looked at the lantern, then at her. You don't have to sit in the dark anymore. Aiona didn't answer at first. She focused on the lantern flame, her breathing slowing as the warmth of the light reached her face. I don't want to be alone anymore, she finally admitted. A simple truth, spoken plainly, without drama, but powerful. It was not a declaration of love, but the most honest thing she had said in years. Elias stepped closer, close enough that their shoulders brushed lightly. Then you're not. They remained on the porch together as the sky shifted from gold to deep blue. The valley quieted. Birds settled for the night. Only the wind moved through the trees. Aiona leaned her head gently against the wooden post beside him, but her weight shifted closer, just enough to show trust without forcing intimacy. Elias didn't move away. He steadied himself, then said softly, We'll figure this out. The danger, the fear, all of it. Together. Aiona closed her eyes for a moment, absorbing the word together. She opened them and looked toward the forest, no longer shrinking from the shadows. When she spoke again, her voice held calm certainty. Tomorrow, we begin preparing for winter. You'll help me gather wood. I'll teach you how to dry, meat the way my husband taught me. And we'll fix the roof before snow comes. It was the first time she spoke of future plans with someone since her husband's death. Elias nodded. We'll do it. Aiona stepped back and held the cabin door half open, looking at him from the threshold. Don't sit so far from the door tonight, she said. If something happens, I want you closer. Elias's eyes softened. I'll stay right here. She left the door open more than an inch this time. This was no longer fear. It was invitation. Elias settled beside the porch, closer to her door than he had the night before, the lantern casting steady, warm light across both their silhouettes. For the first time in years, Aiona went to sleep knowing someone would stay because they wanted to, not because they had to. And for the first time in years, Elias felt himself belonging to a place that didn't carry the weight of his past. Elias woke with a start just before dawn. For a moment, he didn't know what had pulled him from sleep. The air was still, colder than the night before. The lantern Aiona had left burning flickered weakly, nearly out of oil. Elias tightened his blanket around his shoulders and listened, his hand resting near the knife at his belt. Nothing. No footsteps. No voices. But something had changed. He stood quietly and checked the perimeter of the cabin. Frost coated the ground in a thin layer, making every footprint crisp and clear. His eyes followed a faint line of impressions near the west side of the cabin, prints leading toward the ridge. But then he saw something that made him stop. A single boot print only a few feet from the porch. New, deep, fresh from the early morning moisture. Someone had come during the night. Someone had walked right up to Aiona's porch while he slept only meters away. Elias's jaw tightened. His heart hammered. not with panic but with a cold, steady anger. Whoever it was had not stayed long, but the message was obvious. The stranger was watching closely, testing their guard, waiting for the right moment to strike. Aiona's door creaked open behind him. She stepped out with a shawl around her shoulders, her breath fogging in the cold. Elias, what is it? He hesitated for half a second, just long enough to prepare himself, then pointed to the print. He was here. Last night. Aiona stiffened, but she did not panic. Her eyes narrowed with focus instead of fear. Did he take anything? Leave anything? No, Elias said. He only came close enough to see the door open and the lantern lit. Then he turned back. Aiona stepped beside him, studying the ground. She traced the edges of the print with her hand. He's watching. He wants to know if I'm alone. Elias looked at her, firm and steady. You're not. She lifted her eyes to his, and in that moment, something inside her settled. She wasn't a victim waiting in fear anymore. She was someone making a choice about safety, about companionship, about who she allowed into her life. Come inside, she said. It's too cold to talk out here. Inside, the stove crackled with new fire. Aiona set a pot of water to heat while Elias sat at the table, the tension still sharp in his chest. Aiona finally asked the question listeners might have wondered since the story began. What will you do if he comes back while you're here? Elias answered without hesitation. I'll confront him. You won't be the one facing him alone. Aiona studied him for a long time. She wasn't just hearing his words. She was testing their weight, feeling how solid they were. You really mean to stay? She asked softly. I do, and not just for danger. Elias didn't look away. Not just for danger. Silence filled the cabin. Not empty, not strained, but full of something unspoken that needed clarity before the story could truly end. Aiona finally sat across from him, her hands steadying around her cup. Elias, I don't know what this is between us, but I know I want you here. Not because I'm afraid, because I want someone I trust to share my days with. Elias breathed out slowly. Then we want the same thing. This resolved the final lingering questions. Were they together out of need or genuine choice? Would they stay together after the threat passed? Snow began to fall lightly outside, small flakes drifting across the clearing. Aiona walked to the window and watched the white dusting gather on the porch. Winter's coming early, she said. We'll need more wood, and the roof still needs patching. We'll do it together, Elias replied. Aiona turned to him. Then you're staying, truly staying. Elias stood and walked toward her, not close enough to overwhelm, but close enough that she didn't feel alone. If you want me here, then yes. I'll stay. Aiona's eyes softened. She reached out and touched his arm, lightly but with intent. Elias didn't move away. Her hand lingered, steady and warm. I do want you here, she said quietly. More than I expected. She took a breath, the kind that releases years of weight. My husband and I used to fix this cabin every winter. I thought I'd die here alone, doing the same tasks until I couldn't anymore. Elias shook his head gently. Not anymore. Outside, the snow thickened, settling in soft layers on the cold earth. Aiona stepped closer, the distance between them finally closed by her own choice. Elias, she said, voice steady. I want you to make this your home. Not as a guest, as someone who belongs here. Elias felt something shift inside him, a quiet acceptance he had pushed aside for years. I'd like that, he said. Aiona exhaled slowly with relief. She rested her forehead briefly against his chest, a gesture full of trust rather than passion. Elias wrapped an arm around her shoulders, steady but gentle. For the first time in years, they both felt anchored. Over the next hours, they worked together, patching the roof, stacking wood, preparing the cabin for winter as a team. The presence of the stranger lingered, but it no longer controlled Aiona's world. Elias's presence changed the balance. She wasn't hiding anymore. She wasn't living in fear. By nightfall, the cabin was warm, the porch cleared of snow, and the door no longer left open out of fear but cracked open out of comfort. So Elias could hear her, and she could hear him. As they shared a final meal by the fire, Aiona looked at him and said softly, "This feels right." Elias nodded. "It does." There were no more threats left to chase. No unanswered questions. No unfinished paths. The story ended with two wounded people choosing to stay, quietly, steadily, and with a shared understanding that love did not always announce itself loudly. Sometimes it simply arrived and stayed. And so did they.